Hello, everyone. So sorry about the confusion. I am on my husband's phone because my computer decided that this Zoom is not going to happen. So I can see, let's see, I can see Susan, Mariana, Catherine, Doug, let's see, Jenny, and I can't see the other names. It's so wonderful to see everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. And I have my Flaubert biography. I have my Madame Bovary translated by Karl Marx's daughter, and I have lots of coffee to sustain me in my Gustave Flaubert mug. So we're doing this. This novel, you probably sense that this novel just completely stunned me. I read it before, and remember, this is our, here, let me just find my little note card here. I wrote the dates for all of the French novels we read. So this is the last of the 5, right? These are the novels that were supposed to prepare us for Anna Karenina. And I'm just going to go through them in order of our reading. And so first we read Colonel Chabert. That was about 300 years ago. So it was just one title out of the 91 titles that Balzac included in his Human Comedy. And that was published in 1832. And remember, Balzac's death was the sort of the awakening of Gustave Flaubert, because he was trying to write his Temptation of St. Anthony, and he read it to all of his friends, and his friends would just say, burn it. So he did not get much support for his early writing from his friends. And the death of Balzac, I think in 1850 or 1851, was the awakening of Flaubert. And remember, in my notes about Flaubert, I said that Flaubert basically realized that he is going to be the great Quixote, carrying on the tradition of the great Balzac. He is going to take the quintessential Balzacian heroine, a young woman from the provinces who is undone by contact with sophisticated society. And so thus the inception of Emma Bovary. So she is a Balzacian character getting the Flauberian treatment. So we started with Colonel Chabert. And remember, if you liked that novella, there are 90 more titles in the Human Comedy. So good luck. I actually know one person who is reading all of them, and I mention him all the time. And apparently he has very dark days because they're also very depressing. So congratulations. And then we read The Red and the Black, which is Anna's favorite teenage novel. And that was published right before the revolution hit, 1830. And Stendhal just literally kept his finger on the pulse, because that is the year when the revolution hit. And so the entirety of the action of Madame Bovary takes place during the government that is ushered in during that revolution, the July monarchy government, the government of Louis Philippe. And then, of course, we spent the summer frolicking in glorious Mediterranean sunshine. We read The Count of Monte Cristo, and that was 1844. So the action of The Count of Monte Cristo is the same time period as the action of Madame Bovary, because Madame Bovary was published in 1856, but it takes place in its entirety from the beginning to the end, during the time of Louis Philippe. And that is the time period of the main action of The Count of Monte Cristo. And then, of course, Les Miserables, which was published after Madame Bovary. So we read 3 novels that were published before Madame Bovary, and then The Glory of Glory. And I still have my grumpy Victor Hugo staring at me on my desk. Just can't get rid of him. He has such an inspirational scowl. So Flaubert is a part of this group, and yet completely not a part of this group. And it's fascinating that he's friends with everyone who comes after. Remember, during this time period, Hugo is missing in action, right? He is on the island of Guernsey under British jurisdiction of the coast of Brittany. He's not writing. Yes, he's writing. Yeah, 56, he's writing Les Miserables. So it will be published in 1862. And he will leave during that, after that unmentionable year, 1851, when the future Third Empire Emperor Napoleon, Second Empire Emperor Napoleon III is going to usurp the revolution of 1848 and depart from France in disgust into self-exile, which will last until 1870. So you can see that Balzac is of that generation, but Hugo is missing from France during the time period of most of Balzac's publications. And it's fascinating, Balzac is going to be friends with the future generation of French writers. So he will be great friends with Emil Zola. And why is Emil Zola so important to us? Because at the Pantheon in Paris, Emil Zola concludes the crypt that includes Victor Hugo and Alexander Dumas. So Flaubert's best French literary friend, Emile Zola, is going to be buried together with Victor Hugo. And then, of course, they added Alexander Dumas to that crypt in the 20th century when they felt like the French racism of the 19th century must be erased. And we are going to include this wonderful descendant of a Haitian slave into the Pantheon in the script of Victor Hugo and Emile Zola. Another young French writer who was ushered into the literary world by Flaubert was Gidemo Passan. And so Gidemo Passan will be Flaubert's friend all the way to the end. He will actually write an account of Flaubert's death. And his also big buddy was Ivan Turgenev. Turgenev and Flaubert was thick as thieves. Flaubert's house at Rouen, or near Rouen, was visited by Ivan Turgenev several times. And so this is the generation, these are the people who surround him. And then the French author Georges Sand, whose collected works are 70 volumes, and she actually gave, and her name was Aurore Dupin, but she wrote under a male pseudonym. She gave Flaubert her collected works. She visited him in Rouen couple of times, and they had wonderful conversations into the night. She was older. He admired her greatly. So these were his literary friends. But what stunned me about this novel, Anna was stunned into silence by this novel, is to what extent out of all of these writers, in one seemingly straightforward novel, Flaubert managed to capture the essence of the time period in which he was writing. And what stunned me was that last sentence. And some of you pointed out that the druggist, Homais, getting the Legion of Honor seems to be the most abrupt and bizarre way to end this novel. He is such a non-entity. And not only that, but Flaubert becomes enraged. And there is rage of Flaubert in that last chapter. Remember, Homais keeps writing. I mean, he is a publicist. He is the town crier of the newspaper age. He keeps churning out all of these articles and he keeps sending them over. Like every time an event happens, he writes an article for the local paper and describes the event in florid, newspaperish, journalistic. He writes journalese. And so he writes these florid and lurid accounts of the happenings in the town. And it is for his publicistic abilities that he receives the Legion of Honor. He becomes sort of the conscience of his generation. But note, because he becomes the town crier, because he has the ability to project his opinion about the time period, it is his opinion of the time period that becomes the truth, which drives us as readers completely out of our minds. And the difference between him and Charles Bovary, and it's like it's the one word name, Charles Bovary, Charles Bovary, Charles Bovary, what the boys are shouting at the very beginning of the novel. And Emma Bovary's narrative disappears. It's inconsequential, because what matters is the ideological overlayer of this time period that is presented by Homais. And do you remember the madman who's constantly following the coach? He's in so many ways the conscience of the novel. I mean, Dostoevsky will love his holy fools. I mean, for Dostoevsky, the holy fools are sacred. Those of you who read Brothers Karamazov with me, you know that what happened to Stinky Lizaveta was the destruction of the communal spirit of this place. And so the same thing happens in Flaubert. And I'm just wondering to what extent Dostoevsky's depiction of his holy fools was influenced by Flaubert, because this novel influenced everyone who came after. But do you remember what Homais does to this man? Because remember, Homais said, "Oh, come over. I'll give you a cure. I'll give you a remedy." And then when he comes over, of course, he's not profitable. He can't pay, right? And Homais does not treat people without payment. He's not Charles Bovary. And so he finally locks him up in an insane asylum. So you see, everyone who is inconvenient to this new rising bourgeoisie is going to be ridiculed and mocked in press until they're destroyed and their opinion is erased. And then if they are still inconveniently present and not allowing Homais' rise out of mediocrity towards the glory of the glory, his Legion of Honor, they will be locked up in an insane asylum. Their voices are silenced. It's the disappearance of the alternative point of view. And what Flaubert accomplishes in that novel is he writes the truth about this entire time period, where the mediocre becomes the spokesperson for the entire community. And it just floored me. I mean, the cruelty and honesty of Flaubert here is just debilitating for me as a reader. That's why I can't write about it, because I am gobsmacked. I'm speechless. And you see that there are similarities between all of the novels of this time period. And of course, how many times, those of you who read the 5 novels with me, how many times did I mention that the Legion of Honor was instituted by Napoleon Bonaparte, right? He felt that all of the royalist Bourbon awards and honors disappeared. And so now what we need to do, Napoleon said wickedly, and I'm paraphrasing him horribly, it's amazing what a man will do for a bit of ribbon. You see, it's just like this little award, this little thing that is pinned on you that matters so much. I mean, Tolstoy will ridicule the whole idea of this Legion of Honor in War and Peace, because when Napoleon and Alexander I become best friends, Napoleon asks Alexander to point out the bravest of his soldiers, and he awards him the Legion of Honor. And Napoleon actually walks up to the man and like places the ribbon of the Legion of Honor on his coat, as if he assumed that just because it is bestowed by Napoleon, it's going to stick to the chest. And luckily, you know, the minders of Napoleon, you know, the people who like were in charge of perpetuating this glorious being, immediately when Napoleon was through his hand, they were there to hold the Legion of Honor to the chest of the young man. The Legion of Honor was there to be awarded for military glory on the battlefield. Do you remember when we were reading the Count of Monte Cristo? And it was absurd. Everyone was getting the Legion of Honor. There is a cheapening of the Legion of Honor. And remember, Napoleon will die in 1821. So all of these books are written in the aftermath of the kind of glory that Napoleon represented. And so now criminal non-entities are getting the Legion of Honor. And Dumas is very suave and cavalier and very elegant about awarding the Legion of Honor to all of those characters. But it's amazing to what extent with Flaubert, he has only one character who gets it. And it is an indictment of this entire time period. So in so many ways, yet again, we have this incredible novel that speaks for the era, but even more so than the others, because Flaubert stands on the cusp between the end of the Age of Romanticism, and there was no one more romantic than Napoleon himself. He was like the essence of the Romantic movement. All of these poets just worshipped and idolized the sun. And then at the beginning of realism. And so you can sense how in the novel, Emma, who is reading Sir Walter Scott, and yours truly is going down the rabbit hole of Sir Walter Scott novels. I finished Waverley. I finished The Bride of Lammermoor. I finished Rob Roy. I'm in the middle of The Talisman. There are, 30 volumes of Sir Walter Scott. And remember, the inventory at Flaubert's death, he had the complete works of Sir Walter Scott. And Emma knows how Lucia de Lammermoor, the opera, ends because she has read the book. So she is as sophisticated as the cultured audience of her time period, she comes to see Donizetti's Lucia de Lammermoor, knowing the plot of The Bride of Lammermoor of Sir Walter Scott. So we go from Emma absorbing into herself the inheritance of the Romantic age that crashes and is completely destroyed by contact with reality. So Flaubert in this one novel shows us the crisis, the clash between romanticism and realism. And beyond him, all the novels are going to be realist novels. It's surprising to me, having come from Les Miserables to this novel, to what extent Les Miserables is such a romantic novel. It is very honest, but there are so many aspects of just romanticism in it. Like the Friends of the ABC boys, they are all the stuff of dreams. They are dreamy, and their self-sacrificial nature is sort of the essence of the romantic hero. But Balzac goes from this female character who is infatuated with the past because the past contains beauty. And her desire for this sophisticated intellectual beauty is dashed against the confines of reality. And some of you pointed out that even during the happiest day, I love your comments, and I haven't been commenting on comments for so long, but this group was just brilliant in all of your comments. And so many of you pointed out that when Emma, and I love it when you were writing, it's like, I think this is the only happy day of Emma's life. And then like 4 chapters later, Emma is happy again. Okay, well, maybe this is the only chapter where Emma is happy. And of course, that happy chapter was she and Leon have their 3-day honeymoon. And they go on the river, and the River Seine is such a huge part of this romance. And some of you pointed out that all of their romance is accompanied to the background noise of industrial machinery. So that is the terrific clash of Emma's life. She would love to have the romance of the 18th century to be present in the industrial age of urbanized labor. And her soul is just crushed by this experience. The one author who stands very close to Flaubert's just intuitive ability to describe the destruction of the human yearning for beauty and its dashing against the reality of industrial age is, of course, George Eliot's Middlemarch. If you read the novel, you know which scene I'm talking about. It's the industrial machinery floating in the flood. And she actually dashes the whole yearning for beauty of the characters against this onslaught of industrial machinery that just destroys beauty. And Flaubert is very much, though, that same kind of writer. He understands that something essential that is essential to human beings is disappearing right in front of him, and he cannot make it come together again. Notice how all of these novels are about the aspiration of the lower classes to rise up against their level. So with Colonel Chabert, of course, he rises the proper, honest way. He rises because he's a Napoleonic officer, right? And so there was upward mobility all of a sudden. The revolution opened the floodgates of upward mobility. And with Napoleon, that upward mobility meant serving in the military, like Colonel Chabert. So he goes into the military, he rises through his courage and daring all the way to the top to just be destroyed by the time period that is the cruel aftermath of the fall of Napoleon. And note that a certain character is found, and I'm not going to, those of you who have not read all of these books, I'm not going to reveal too much, but I see several people who have read all the books. So I'm going to like walk very gently, revealing enough for all of the readers to be interested and to like whet your appetite to read all of these books that we covered in the past. A certain character is found in a brothel and is elevated to the position of an elegant lady. So that's Balzac. He knows that this upward mobility from the gutter to polite society is accompanied by the loss of soul. She becomes heartless. And then just think of Julien Sorel in The Red and the Black. He's a miller's son. When we first encounter him in the novel, he is reading the memoirs of Napoleon from St. Helena. But at the time after Napoleon's death, there is no elevation through military glory any longer. And so he does what he can. He goes into the church, right? Because thinking, and that's the title. The red is the army, the church is the black is the church. So we have that character. Then the Count of Monte Cristo, the elevation of a common sailor into the most dashing, the most mysterious character pretty much in all of literature. And then, of course, the greatest of them all, Jean Valjean. How often does he say that he's a simple tree pruner? And he is called Jean Valjean because he is Jean, the son of Jean. It's like John, simple John. He is the quintessence of the everyman who rises from being a working class person to a position of middle class contentment, if we can call it that. Who is Emma Bovary? She's a farmer's daughter. So just think, a common soldier who goes up because of military glory in the Napoleonic period, a miller's son, a sailor, a tree pruner, and a farmer's daughter. Those are the characters who are glorified in these 5 books. So this upward mobility, the opening up of the movement between classes that happens after the French Revolution is the quintessence of the novels of this period. What else is quintessential in the novels of this time period is the rise of the lawyer class. It's amazing. Every one of these novels contains a lawyer. Colonel Chabert starts in a lawyer's office where all of the clerks are having the funnest time of their life, saying nasty things about all of their clients, right? Julien Sorel doesn't become a lawyer, but he sort of gets the, property managerial tutoring that brings him in sort of the counsel or lawyer class. How often are lawyers impersonated by a certain character in the Count of Monte Cristo? Remember, there's a character who always appears either as a priest or as a lawyer from the Thompson and Thompson Company, nonetheless. Marius in Les Miserables is a lawyer and a successful one at the end of the novel, right? And then in this novel, of course, we have Léon, who sows his wild oats, and he goes to Paris and he goes to balls with exciting grisettes. Does everyone know what a grisette is? It's a woman of a lower class who, lives by her own wits in the big city. She's pretty and she has pretty things because older men are thrilled to waste their pocket money on attractive Parisian women. So what happened to Emma is just fine in Paris, but it's not just fine in the provinces. And remember when she's having her final reservations, and that scene is just so gorgeously described by Flaubert. They're in the church, in the cathedral, and she's like almost grasping onto Virgin Mary, just any bit of Virgin Mary, just save me, please. I mean, you can almost see this whirlwind sweeping through the Rouen cathedral, and Emma just blowing with the wind, but still holding on with one hand to some kind of holy object in the church, not to be swept away by her own inner turmoil, by her own desire. And then Léon finally has had enough. And remember, Léon says to himself, we have his internal monologue, in Paris, he couldn't have done this. He couldn't afford it, right? Because Parisian women cost money. But here in the provinces, a young man who has a law degree from Paris is a very attractive catch indeed. So they emerge out of the cathedral and he grabs a cab and she says, oh, and he says, but it's done in Paris. So that is the final decider for Emma Bovary to go into this dreadful life of sin and degradation, because it's done in Paris. So, and remember how often I mentioned all of the women that Flaubert knew in his life, like James Pradier's wife, who was a habitual philanderer, and the love of his life, Louise Collet, who had an off and on relationship with Flaubert for 8 years. And those of you who need to know more, I mean, this Geoffrey Wall biography is stunning. It is so well written. It is so thorough. He must have read every diary, every letter, anything that is available and in public domain about Flaubert, because he gives such titillating details about Flaubert's very strange life. So we have all of these lawyers, we have all of these passions in every one of these novels, but this particular novel never gets to Paris, right? So Colonel Chabert, the whole novel takes place in Paris with sort of reverberations of battlefields and past life. Well, The Count of Monte Cristo is a very Paris novel. So is Les Miserables, and of course, The Red and the Black. So this is the first provincial novel that we read. So he does take on or pick up the mantle of Balzac, but instead of bringing his provincial female character to Paris, was all of the resulting consequences, he keeps his darling Emma in the provinces. And so this is the catastrophe of a young, aspiring, eager, earnest, brilliant, very intellectual heart, who never gets to live her Parisian dream. And how often does Emma say, well, when her daughter is born, she curses and says, why is she not a boy, right? And we all sort of agreed that the Daisy Buchanan character from The Great Gatsby is very much so the same character, because when her little daughter is born, she says, I hope she's a little fool, because being a girl and understanding the catastrophe of being a girl is nothing but trouble. And Emma is very much so that kind of character. And then she says to Leon, but you are a man, you can escape, you can aspire, and it's in your hands to make your aspirations a reality. And so what happens to Leon at the end of the novel? He marries the woman that his mother wants him to marry. Does that ring a bell? It's the fate of Charles Bovary. He married the woman that his mother wanted him to marry. And remember, Flaubert never married. And he never married for a reason, because he felt that marriage is fraught with severe consequences. And the most important thing that he feared was having a child. And so Emma's reticence towards her baby is in so many ways Flaubert's reticence about leaving an offspring. And part of that is he had epilepsy, and his first severe epileptic fit happened to him when he was in his early 20s. That's why he gave up studying in law school in Paris. So Leon going to Paris to become a lawyer, that is very personal for Flaubert. He went to Paris and he was there for a few years trying to pass his law exam, and he could not do it. And during one of those attempts, can you imagine how disappointed mother was? So during one of those attempts to prepare for his for his law exam, he had his first epileptic fit, and then the family got spooked, because they really felt that they're going to lose him. And so he would have these epileptic fits throughout his life. Remember that what I said, that's what he had in common with Dostoevsky. They were both born in 1821. They both had surgeon fathers, and they both had epilepsy. And so Flaubert wrote in his diaries that he never, ever, ever wants to have a child. And there are very delicate, intimate details of his sexual encounters with Louise Collet that did not result in her pregnancy. I hope I whetted your appetite, because they are very, very graphically described. So you can read all about it in the Geoffrey Wall biography of Flaubert. They had a really, really crazy love affair. I mean, crazy does not begin to describe it. It was wild. And so Emma is a farmer's daughter. Some of you were very disturbed by the fact that her dad said that it's wonderful that Charles is going to take her off his hands. But Emma could not survive on the farm. Emma was too delicate. Emma was too smart, too sophisticated. She went into that convent. I mean, what is a father to do? Your wife dies, your son dies. Remember, there was a son in the family too, and he is stuck with a little girl. He doesn't know anything about girls. He doesn't know how to raise a girl. It's amazing how, all of these children are handed over to someone else to be raised, right? Little Bert is handed over to very inexperienced, lower class, working class household to be raised with disastrous consequences. So little Bert, she is nursed at first, which is, fine. You usually find a working class woman who needs to make a little bit of money to nurse your baby, but she is there a lot, even beyond her nursing months, years. And just think what a difference it is from Emma's education that was given to her by her father. He sends her to a very good convent, so she becomes a lady. They give her all the skills. She learns to play the piano. She learns to sing. She learns to write beautifully. Do you remember how sophisticated her letters to the patients are? They're a work of art. She writes these beautiful letters to the patients, never even mentioning money, but they sort of get the memo as soon as they receive one of Emma's beautiful, exquisitely crafted letters. She could have become her husband's business associate very, very easily. If it was up to her, she could have run his clinic. They could have been very successful. But Charles Bovary was not the kind of man who wants to be successful. Charles' biggest problem was that he was always content. He was content to have his pathetic education in the hands of the priest, who would give him a few Latin lessons between baptism and burial. It was just such a funny chapter. There's this village priest who's like always busy. You're always either baptizing someone or marrying someone or burying someone. That's the life of a village priest. And he would like impart a few phrases of Latin into poor Charles in between. The dad did not want to send the child to school sooner because he wanted to save money. So by the time he ends up at school, he's like, half-educated teenager, mocked mercilessly. And it must have been just devastating for him. He doesn't pass his medical exam, so he just gets this sanitation certificate, right? So he's not fully a doctor. And he's just content with everything, Mama said, I have to get this medical degree, so, what the heck? I'm going to study till I get it. And Mama wants me to marry this wealthy widow. Well, I could do worse. And then the one act of rebellion against his mother is marrying the beautiful, lovely, exquisite, magical Emma Bovary. And she becomes his undoing. And I'm ready to sob when I remember the first description of their first moments of marital bliss. Remember, he would like be ready to leave and Emma would look at him a certain way and he would run back and the passion is rekindled. And then he would just walk out of the house with that glorious smile of triumph on his face. And Emma would stand at the window and wave to him. And he thought that he's the happiest of men because out of this marital bliss, he would go and, help people to the best of his ability. He was a nice guy. But then we follow Emma and she walks back into the bedroom and we see the boredom. I mean, it's that inception of happiness, that inception of beauty of their marital bliss is already the inception of the dissatisfaction that is gnawing at Emma's soul because she sees beyond this. She can see wider horizons. And I often made references to other novels with female protagonists. Well, Maggie Tulliver from The Mill and the Floss is just the closest British equivalent to Emma. She wants the beyond. And of course, Jane Eyre. She's a governess and she stands at the top of Thornfield Hall. And she often goes to the top tower of Thornfield Hall to just see as far as she can see. She wants to see beyond the horizon. She wants to see beyond what is given to her by her very, very narrow lot. So there are so many women characters like that in 19th century. Middlemarch of George Eliot is another one. Just trying to think of others. Well, Catherine Earnshaw in Wuthering Heights. She is very unhappy with her lot and she wants to burst her soul open so that all of this scaffolding that is holding her soul in would disappear. So Emma is not alone in this seeking of wanting to know what is beyond. And it's fascinating that she's written by a male author because, Maggie Tulliver and Dorothea Brooke are both the figments of woman writer's imagination. George Eliot, her name was Marianne Evans. And then Jane Eyre is Charlotte Bronte's baby. And Catherine Earnshaw is her sister's, Emily Bronte's baby. But how did Flaubert portray the trials and tribulations of the female soul so spectacularly? I mean, he thought that he was Emma Bovary in one of his just sort of outbursts of madness. He understood the pain. He was almost this both both man and woman kind of creatures out of Greek mythology who could just split himself into both the male and the female and describe the passions of the female soul with so much accuracy that as soon as the novel was published, he was overwhelmed by letters from female readers who were saying that he described their life. How could he, with so much accuracy, describe what was burning in their souls? And some of these letters he actually received from women who never married because they denied themselves any brush with reality because they knew that reality would dash their romantic aspirations. And he remained friends with several of these women for a long time. They would correspond. So needless to say, there were so many allusions to immoral behavior in this novel that he was sued. And so the lawsuit of Gustave Flaubert is one of those amazing moments of censorship in literature. And he was put on trial. And this is what I need to write about in that final comment, that he dedicated the novel to his lawyer. It's just the most incredible dedication in history. So, I told you when we read Brothers Karamazov that the best dedication in all of literature is Brothers Karamazov. It's dedicated to Anna Grigorievna Dostoevskaya. He dedicated to his muse, his lover, the love of his life, his wife. And it makes me so happy that he did it. But this novel is dedicated to the lawyer who got him off the hook. And I might try to find just the entire final argument of the lawyer. I'm sure it's available online. Everything is in public domain that is related to Flaubert, and just post it on our webpage so that we can read the final argument of the lawyer. And Gustave Flaubert was eternally grateful. And it's amazing that this is his first novel. He's 35 years old when it's published. He has written 4 books, but they were never published. He was a perfectionist. And so he would lie on that green Morocco leather sofa, right? Just dream of these perfect passages. Sometimes it would take him 4 or 5 days to write 1 page. He was just completely obsessed with the beauty of the language. And some writers thought that the original, the French Madame Bovary, is as close to poetry as you get in prose form. But he birthed this novel. It caused an absolute scandal, and he walked out of it unscathed. And so those of you who read, I know that some of you rushed off to read Salammbô, and those of you who read it or are reading it, it is so much more brutal. It's like exquisite brutality for an entire novel. There's violence to living beings done continuously in the course of an entire novel. It brutalizes you so much. But that's the novel that everyone loved, to the point where he's invited to court, to the imperial court. So the revolution of 1848 happens. Then in 1851, Napoleon III declares himself emperor. His wife is Empress Eugenia. She is asking Flaubert to draw costume design for her because she wants to have a Salammbô inspired ball at the Imperial Palace in Paris. And then Flaubert's like, okay, well, your Imperial Highness, anything for a cause. And so Flaubert presents to her the costume design for her outfit. This is the Empress of France. And then she deems the whole thing just a little too risque. But it's amazing that Flaubert is expected to be sort of like a court intellectual. He's invited to the imperial court, and his biggest confidant becomes one of the nieces of Napoleon Bonaparte, Mathilde Bonaparte. She had her own palace, and she held sway over this intellectual salon. And Flaubert was a regular. If he didn't show up, well, where was our wit? And so Flaubert becomes from a courtroom entity who is sued over his first novel to the wit of the imperial court. And of course, the novel that I loved just absurdly was Sentimental Education. I was reading it and I thought, and I was texting all of my friends and I'm like, I am 3/4 done with the novel. Nothing happened so far. Like, what is this? And then you read the last line and it just blows your mind. And then you realize you missed the whole novel. The whole novel was precisely that which you were not noticing. And so looking forward at some point when I have lots of time on my hands to reread Sentimental Education, because just like Madame Bovary, Sentimental Education requires a second reading. But with Emma Bovary, it's a novel that absolutely stunned me. I told you that I dutifully sobbed through the last 3 chapters. I can't stand what happens to Charles. And I noticed, and I wrote in one of my final comments that in his heart of hearts, he was a romantic. But it only is revealed after she's no longer with him. And it's the greatest tragedy of this love. I mean, what makes this novel so incredibly tragic to me, that these two people deeply loved each other. And it's there. I mean, when Emma brushes his hair softly with her dying hand, and there's this tenderness in this movement, when Charles inspects her stomach and he puts his hand on her stomach, and there's this incredible intimacy in that gesture. I mean, they're touching each other for the first time in years. And it just breaks your heart, because they could have loved each other if they would have been just wise enough to know how to reach for each other. And that is the tragedy of this novel. She had the love of her life. It was her husband. And the two of them just did not know how to touch the divine in the other. And it was so close. The possibility of that love. It's exactly the very end of Eugene Onegin. That happiness was so close, so possible, and yet inconceivable in the present moment. So that's where Anna Barker lost it. So confess, guilty as charged. Yours truly, who teaches all of these books with so much enthusiasm, is undone by a 270-page novel by a silly French guy from Rouen. And Flaubert was my big revelation. I've never taught this book before. I've never taught any of these books before. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to hyperventilate about the books that I've loved since I was a teenager. And just, they are the building blocks of my literary mind. But Flaubert just floored me. The beauty of this novel, the wisdom of this novel, his incredible ability to capture the essence of this bourgeois experience of breaking through class barriers and not being very successful at it. And the whole upward mobility madness of this time period, and the phoniness of absolutely everything in the wake of the end of the Napoleonic period. This desire to recapture the beauty and the romance of it all in a world where beauty and romance are dashed against the industrial might of the age. And so some of you pointed out that, Anna, you have been a shadowy figure the past 2 weeks, because I posted that photograph of my shadow, and it's right in front of the railroad tracks that go in front of the pavilion where Flaubert used to sit and write while looking at the River Seine. And that moment of me standing there, I mean, it's amazing. I took a picture of myself on that spot before I started teaching the novel. And it was eerie to me that the end of the novel was exactly that moment of me standing on that spot, because we live in the post-industrial age, right? And so all of those factories that were built in the garden of Flaubert's house. And remember, speaking of bankruptcies, the family goes bankrupt. I mean, the niece's husband is a bourgeois entrepreneur, and he makes a very, very risky investment, and the entire family goes bankrupt. This may have precipitated Flaubert's death, because he had an epileptic fit, because the family finances were devastating. He had to give up his Paris apartment. They had to start cutting down on all expenses. And then that's why we have that incredibly complex inventory of all of his possessions at the moment of his death because it was necessary for the fire sale. And so it's amazing that he writes this novel at 35, he'll die at 59, and at his death, the same thing will happen as is happening in the final days of Emma's life, where there's an inventory taken of all of her possessions. And so that's why we know how many volumes of all the authors he had, and how many gloves and champagne glasses and hats, and how many exotic things that he brought from all of his trips he had in his possession. And the house was torn down and a factory was built in its location. So this industrial middle class ugliness takes over the place of this beauty, where this final romantic who happened to live in the age of realism dreamed his beautiful dreams, and it's no longer there. But what was stunning to me, the 21st century reader, is that all of those industrial buildings in this post-industrial age are abandoned, and there's like grass and trees growing out of that ugliness. So for me, it was just that moment of, why did we destroy all of this beauty and replaced it with rational ugliness that now has been abandoned? Do you have any questions? Woo! Any questions at all? Oh my gosh, it's so good to see all of you. Look at that. There are so many of you.
Hi, Anna. This is Jody Beimer. It's not even a question. I just want to say out loud that without the interpretation that you offer in these novels, I would be lost. It's just amazing. I am so thankful that I have this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And you probably can tell that I am a person who loves books to oblivion. And can you talk about the influence on Zola? I would love to, as soon as I do some research on that. Remember, I'm not a doctor. I just play one on TV.
You know, I first read this book as probably a 16 or 17-year-old. Mm-hmm. I so loved Emma, and I identified with her in so many ways. I mean, there was a church near my house, and I would go to this church, not out of a sense of the religion of it, but out of the smell of the incense and candles and the same things that Emma Bovary was onto, the romantic mystery of it. So fascinating is I haven't read the book, you know, in 50 years. This reading, my feeling towards Emma has done a complete 180.
Right.
I mean, I have so many problems with her, and I don't find her sympathetic. And when she pushes her child and injures her child and then denies it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting how I've noticed my own reactions to the novel.
And it's amazing how much all of us have moved on from Emma, but Emma was in her 20s. She was gone when she was in her 20s. She never got a chance to mature, to come to terms with the world. She just threw it all away. Remember, I very self-consciously said threw it all away. There's a character in Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, Septimus Smith, and she finds out about his death, and she says, he has done it. He has thrown it all away. And so there's the sense of throwing away the opportunity to become a complete self. And the older we get, the more complete we become, the more clueless we are, because the more sort of we realize that there are all of these areas that we'll never know. We just become content with what we can manage, but then the vastness of it all still overwhelms us. And Emma never grows up. She stays young and beautiful always, which is shocking. And, you know, here, insert lecture on people dying young from, you know, in pop culture, it's like a craze, you know, with all of these young people just departing too soon, like, you know, I mean, Marilyn Monroe, and I'm trying to think of the young man who played the Joker. Heath Ledger. It's both men and women. It's shocking. And it's amazing to what extent, they clash with reality and they can't stand the fight. And they just depart. It's shocking to me because it happens so often in the novels I teach. I mean, in Dostoevsky novels, there's a suicide in every novel. And students often tell me, everything about the novel is great. We love it. But the death scene or the suicide is just implausible. It's not real. And I always tell them, you have to remember that with all the deaths in Dostoevsky, he literally finds these odd bits of information in newspapers about strange murders and strange suicides. He clips out the notice. And then out of that very particular, he deduces the universal. And it's the same with Flaubert. He knew about this woman who was a doctor's wife in a small town in the Rouen region. And she wanted to have the fancy things of life. And then she poisoned herself with cyanide. And so with Emma, it was arsenic. And then what happened to Eleanor Marx, Karl Marx's daughter? It's shocking. And what I didn't write about, she was also a translator of Ibsen. And those of you who know the plot of A Doll's House, what happens to that character is absolutely shocking in the play. And she also forges documents. That's what the main character of A Doll's House has in common with Emma Bovary. They're both document forgers. And they both do it for a cause, right? And A Doll's House of Ibsen was so shocking when it was first performed that the actress who was supposed to, God, what is the main character's name? I'm just stumped right now.
Nora,
thank you. Nora, the actress who was supposed to play Nora, she refused to do the ending. She just said, that's impossible. It is an absolutely impossible ending. And she would not play Nora at the end of the play. Well, Eleanor Marx was a translator of Ibsen as well. And so it's like her end is shocking. It was cyanide. And life imitating, so art imitates life in the case of Emma, based on a woman who was a small town doctor's wife, and then life imitating art. It is shocking. I mean, the end is shocking. And the fact that I chose this translator because I think it is the best translation. Also, just will give you a little tidbit. There was an English governess in the Flaubert house who was raising his niece, Caroline. And she was the first translator of Madame Bovary. And that translation cannot be found. It's not in the archives. Nobody knows where it is. That the governess in the Flaubert house, the English governess, was the first translator, and Flaubert loved that translation, and it was never published. And so I started with 4 translations, and I ended up with Eleanor Marx's translation because it was exquisite, absolutely exquisite, and how tragic a life that poor woman has led. But I had it both in book form, I had it in on Project Gutenberg. That's where I got all my quotes. And then I found an audible recording of the Eleanor Marx translation. So I lived in this total immersion into her version of Flaubert. Well, any more questions? Otherwise, I'm off because the University Opera is doing La Traviata. Speaking of women dying sad deaths, the joke about that opera is it's about an opera, a woman who died 3 times. And there's a literary connection, of course. So Alexander Dumas' son, whose name was also Alexander Dumas, he had an affair with a Paris courtesan who died in her early 20s of tuberculosis. And he was so heartbroken that he wrote the novel, The Lady with the Camellias, about his love affair with Alphonsine Duplessis. And so she died in real life. She died in Alexander Dumas, the son's novel. And then Giuseppe Verdi saw that novel that was turned into a play on a Paris stage. And he was so taken by the story that he wrote the opera, La Traviata. And so she gets to die a 3rd time. So there's the sad story of a young woman who died thrice. But the University of Iowa Theater is doing La Traviata. So I am psyched about hearing the gorgeous and sad music of Giuseppe Verdi this evening. And then I'd better start cramming Byron. So some of you asked which version of Byron to purchase, and I think we'll just stay with what's online. So I think tomorrow I'm going to find Project Gutenberg link to the pilgrimage, Child Herald's pilgrimage, and then I will do links for all of the works, and I'll post them every time, because in my study there's a volume of Byron, and it's this thick. It like weighs like 10 pounds. It is incredible. And so we're not going to lug that volume about. We'll just thank public domain, and we'll have our Byron on our.
Yeah, the Penguin books had to break it into 2 separate volumes.
Right. And some of the editions just have excerpts from the longer works, and so we are not doing excerpts. We're doing the whole thing.
Right.
So I'm going to send links to everyone, and I said that I just decided 20 preliminary notes would be sufficient. So I'm going to repost the one about his club foot that I wrote for our group, because he's definitely a fascinating person who overcame a personal physical problem and overcame spectacularly. And then I'm going to repost that quote of Percy Shelley when he visited him in Ravenna. They were just like, they would sleep till the afternoon and then talk and then go riding along the coast and then talk till 4 a.m. And even Percy Shelley said, if this doesn't kill me, I'm going to make it through this. So Byron is absolutely endlessly fascinating. So don't panic that we are leaving French literature. So it's Byron, May 1st through pretty much August 31st, and then Anna Karenina all fall long. I'm going to give a talk in May on Anna Karenina in Minneapolis, and then I'll do another talk in December. And then we'll see. I think I really want to read all of the sequels to The Three Musketeers, including The Three Musketeers. So there are 2 sequels. There are 2 sequels. So I think summer should be spent with frivolous authors like Alexander Dumas. We are all
Walter Scott.
Okay, and then so we'll read The Three Musketeers, and then sequel 1, sequel 2, and then all of Sir Walter Scott. And then we will just all say, we'll have to have T-shirts saying, I am Emma Bovary. That we are older, wiser Emma Bovarys who made it to like gray hair and lots of wisdom. You've been a marvelous group. If there are any questions, I'm just trying to look at the chat really fast. Thank you. Frankenstein. Oh my gosh, yes, Frankenstein is amazing. Would you like me to give you my Frankenstein lecture now? I'm ready. I've taught that one many times. It is an amazing work.
You have to go to the opera.
Right, yeah, connected to Byron, by the way. So Frankenstein, the inception of Frankenstein is connected to Byron. How about this? I will, don't know much about Zola. I would have to research that. Okay, so okay, yes, and never read now we're all wise readers, right? We never read the introduction to any novel before we read the novel, because those people are evil. They give too much away. So yes, I'm going to, last comment, I'm going to write a Frankenstein comment to Lord Byron, because Mary Shelley actually started writing Frankenstein in Geneva in Villa Diodati, while she and Shelley, to whom she was not married, was living with Lord Byron, who was sleeping with her half-sister. So if you thought that this book was immoral, Byron, we have it in us. Thank you so much. You've been wonderful readers. I'm off to Traviata, and Byron will undo us even more than than Flaubert.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.